Zanil and her sister Lorado grew up together in Nairobi, but they couldn't have been more different. Lorado was loud, confident, and always surrounded by people. Zanil was the quiet one, the kind who listened more than she spoke, who loved simple things. When she met Tendo, a kind-hearted farmer from Eldoret, something in her heart just knew. He grew maize, kept chickens, and worked with his hands every single day. Life with him wasn't going to be fancy, but it felt real. When Zanil told her family she was getting married, Lorado couldn't hide her disbelief. In front of everyone, she burst out laughing. "You, marrying a man who smells like soil? Couldn't you find a real job in that village too?" The room went quiet. Their mother looked away, saying nothing. Zanil just smiled, hurt but steady. "At least he works for what he eats," she said softly. Lorado rolled her eyes and changed the subject, but Zanil's heart ached. Still, she refused to let pride steal her happiness. The wedding day came. It was small, no flashy cars, no photographers, no drama. Just friends, family from the village, and laughter that felt warm and true. Tendo wore a simple suit, his hands still rough from work. When he looked at her, Zanil felt richer than she ever had in the city. Lorado didn't come. She said she was too busy. But as Zanil danced barefoot on the grass that night, she realized she didn't need her sister's approval. She already had everything that mattered. Life in Eldoret wasn't easy, but it was real. Every morning before the sun rose, Zanil and Tendo were already outside, boots sinking into the damp soil. The air smelled of earth and dew, the kind of smell that promised growth. They worked side by side, feeding the chickens, checking on the seedlings, and laughing at small things that city people might never understand. Money was tight at first. Some days they ate what they grew and saved every shilling they could. But they had dreams bigger than their struggles. Slowly, they built a greenhouse from recycled materials. Then came the irrigation pipes, old second-hand ones that Tendo fixed himself. Bit by bit, their small farm began to change. The first time the greenhouse filled with rows of bright green vegetables, Zanil cried happy tears. Meanwhile, Lorado's life was all over social media. She posted photos in fancy restaurants, sipping imported wine, and posing beside her new husband, Chaik, a businessman who drove a shiny SUV. Every photo looked perfect: designer bags, polished nails, city lights. To outsiders, she was living the dream. Zanil saw the pictures sometimes but never felt jealous. She was proud of her sister, even if their worlds were miles apart. The only thing she wished was for Lorado to respect her choices, to see that happiness doesn't always wear high heels. Then one afternoon, while Zanil was gathering eggs, her phone buzzed. A message from Lorado popped up. "Still chasing chickens? Or finally tired of pretending you're happy in that mud hole?" Zanil just stared at the screen for a moment. She felt that familiar sting of hurt, but she didn't reply. Instead, she slipped the phone into her pocket and went back to work. The maize field was calling, golden and ready for harvest, their first big one. That evening, as the sun sank low and painted the fields in orange light, Zanil and Tendo stood side by side, watching the maize sway gently in the wind. Their hands were dirty, their backs sore, but their hearts were full. Tendo smiled at her, wiping sweat from his brow. "You see, my love? The soil always rewards patience." Zanil smiled back, thinking of her sister's message. For a moment, she wished Lorado could see this. How peace looked when it wasn't wrapped in luxury. As the crickets started to sing and the day faded into night, Zanil whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. She didn't need anyone's validation. She had found her own kind of wealth, in love, in hard work, and in the simple joy of watching something grow from nothing. The rains came harder than anyone expected that year. At first, Zanil and Tendo were grateful. Rain meant life for their crops. But soon, the drizzle turned into downpour, and the fields they loved so much began to flood. Water swallowed half their maize, the greenhouse roof tore open, and the chickens huddled in corners, shivering and scared. Zanil stood helpless, watching weeks of hard work wash away. That night, after the rain finally stopped, she scrolled through her phone, hoping for some good news. Instead, she froze at a post on Lorado's page. Her sister had shared a meme that said, "When you marry for love, not sense." Below it were laughing emojis and comments from her city friends. Zanil's chest tightened. She didn't even know what hurt more, the loss of their crops or the fact that her own sister found amusement in. Tendo found her sitting on the porch, tears running down her face. He sat beside her quietly, took her hand, and said softly, "Let them laugh, my love. The soil never forgets who watered it." His words settled deep in her heart. The next morning, instead of giving up, they got back to work. They cleaned the farm, fixed what they could, and started again, planting new seeds, repairing the greenhouse, and saving every coin they earned from selling eggs and vegetables. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, life returned to their fields. Months later, their persistence finally bore fruit in the most unexpected. A government officer visited their area to inspect small farms for a new sustainable agriculture grant. When he saw how Zanil and Tendo had rebuilt after the flood, he was impressed. Their farm was selected for the program, and they received funding to expand, new equipment, better irrigation, and even training for modern techniques. For the first time, they were able to hire 2 workers to help them. Their farm grew faster than they ever imagined. Soon, their fresh produce started supplying local schools and hospitals. Trucks came weekly to collect maize, vegetables, and eggs. The once small field that people laughed at had become a source of livelihood, not just for them, but for others too. When Zanil looked around, she didn't see luxury or fame, she saw meaning. Their home was still simple, but the barns were full, the chickens healthy, and laughter filled the evenings again. One night, as they sat watching the sunset after a long day, Tendo handed her a cup of tea and smiled. You see? The storm didn't break us. It watered our roots. Zanil smiled back, her eyes glistening. The soil had tested them, mocked them, and finally rewarded them. Success had come quietly. No fancy clothes, no city lights. Just peace, love, and the deep satisfaction of knowing they had built it all together. Life in the city had always looked perfect for Lorado. Expensive clothes, dinners in fancy restaurants, luxury vacations. She had it all. Her husband, Chaik, ran a fast-growing company that everyone talked about. They were the couple people admired online, the ones others tried to copy. But behind the filters and the smiles, cracks had already started to show. Chaik's business began to crumble when a few big investors pulled out. Rumors spread fast, bad deals, unpaid loans, fake contracts. Suddenly, the man who once threw money around couldn't even pay his employees. Lorado tried to keep up appearances, posting old photos and pretending everything was fine. But the truth always finds its way out. Their bills piled up, the rent fell behind, and soon even the house help left. The spa appointments stopped, the wine shelves went empty, and the phone calls from friends disappeared one by one. Lorado had built her whole world around image, and now it was crashing in front of her. One stormy night, just as Zanil and Tendo were closing up the farmhouse, there was a loud knock at the door. Zanil opened it and froze. Lorado stood there, soaked from the rain, mascara running down her face, her once perfect hair tangled and limp. She looked nothing like the confident sister from Nairobi. "Z," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I need help. Chaik's in debt. They froze our accounts. We have nowhere to go." Zanil's heart sank. For a moment, all the old memories came rushing back. The laughter, the mockery, the meme about marrying for love, not sense. She could still hear Lorado's voice teasing her, calling her life a mud hole. And yet, seeing her sister like this, trembling and lost, broke something inside her. Tendo stood behind quietly, his face calm but serious. He didn't need to say anything. His eyes said it all. This was a moment of choice. Zanil took a slow breath. "Come inside," she said softly. She led Lorado to the small living room, where the fire was still warm. She gave her a blanket and a cup of tea. Lorado sat there, staring into space, unable to speak. Zanil didn't ask questions, didn't scold her, didn't remind her of past words. She just looked at her and said gently, "We'll talk in the morning." That night, as Lorado slept on the couch, Zanil sat by the window, listening to the rain. Part of her heart hurt from the past, but another part whispered of forgiveness. Family wasn't perfect, she knew that, but sometimes love had to rise above pride. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something new between them. The next morning, the smell of fresh mandatsi and tea filled the farmhouse. Zanil was up early, setting the table while Tendo fed the chickens outside. Lorado joined them a little later, wearing one of Zanil's old sweaters. Her eyes were puffy from crying, but her tone tried to sound normal, almost cheerful. "Morning," she said, forcing a smile as she poured herself some tea. For a while, they ate in silence. The only sounds were the birds outside and the clinking of cups. Then Lorado cleared her throat. "So, I've been thinking, we just need a small loan. Maybe 3 million shillings? You've done well here, right?" Zanil almost dropped her spoon. 3 million? She repeated softly, not sure if she heard right. Tendo looked up from his plate, his face calm but unreadable. "That's a lot of money, Lorado," he said evenly. "We don't have that kind of cash just lying around. And even if we did, we'd need a clear reason. What exactly do you plan to do with it?" Lorado gave a short, sharp laugh. "What do you mean a reason? Your family. I just thought you could help us get back on our feet. Isn't that what people do when they're doing well?" Tendo stayed quiet, letting the silence speak for him. Zanil reached for her sister's hand, but Lorado pulled it away. "So now the farmers think they're better than us?" Lorado said bitterly, her voice rising. "Just because you have a few cows and a piece of land, you think you're some kind of success story?" Zanil took a slow breath, steady but firm. "No, Lorado," she said softly. "We don't think we're better, but we've learned to live within our means, to work for what we have. That's something you might need to learn too. The room fell silent again. The words hung heavy between them. Lorado's face hardened, pride flickering in her eyes. She pushed her chair back suddenly and stood up. You know what? I shouldn't have come, she said, grabbing her bag. I thought maybe you'd changed, but clearly you're still the same, too proud to help. Zanil stood too, but she didn't chase her. It's not pride, Lorado. It's peace, she said quietly. Lorado turned away without replying and stormed out of the house. The door slammed behind her, and the sound echoed through the quiet morning. Tendo walked over and placed a gentle hand on Zanil's shoulder. You did the right thing, he said. Sometimes helping means letting someone face their own soil. Zanil nodded slowly, her heart heavy. She wanted to cry, but she didn't. She just looked out the window, watching her sister walk down the dusty road, realizing that some lessons could only grow through hardship, just like crops after a storm. It didn't take long for the phone calls to start. One after another, Zanil's relatives began ringing her up, their voices full of judgment and drama. Zanil, how can you let your sister suffer like that? You're being heartless. She's your blood, for heaven's sake. No one asked what had really happened. No one wanted to know that Lorado had shown up asking for 3 million shillings, or that she had walked out angrily when Zanil said no. To them, Zanil was the bad sister, the one who forgot where she came from. Zanil tried to explain, but every call felt the same. It's not that I don't care, she said again and again, her voice breaking a little each time. I just can't fix someone else's mistakes by creating new ones. But her words never seemed to matter. People love a story more than the truth, and gossip travels faster than maize in a strong wind. Even distant cousins who hadn't called in years suddenly had opinions. Aunties whispered that success had made Zanil proud. Old neighbors said she thought she was too good for her family now. The same people who once ignored her when she left the city now spoke her name like she was the villain in a family drama. Tendo stayed calm through it all. He listened quietly as Zanil paced the house, phone in hand, tears of frustration in her eyes. Let them talk, he said softly one night. The truth doesn't need defending. It just needs time. A few days later, time finally spoke. One evening, as Zanil and Tendo were sorting vegetables for delivery, the local news played in the background. Suddenly, Lorado's name flashed across the screen. Businesswoman Lorado Okoro facing fraud charges after husband's company collapse. Zanil froze, staring at the TV. The report explained how Chaik's company had been under investigation for months. Fake invoices, missing investor funds, unpaid debts. Lorado's name appeared among the co-directors. The room went silent except for the voice of the reporter. Zanil's heart ached, not with anger, but with sorrow. This wasn't how she wanted her sister to learn her lesson. Within hours, the same relatives who had flooded her phone went quiet. No calls, no messages, not a single "how could you" anymore. It was as if the gossip line had suddenly died. Those who were so quick to judge now acted like they had never said a word. That night, Zanil sat on the porch, looking out at the stars. Tendo joined her, handing her a cup of tea. You see, he said gently, truth has deep roots. Lies may grow fast, but they fall with the first rain. Zanil nodded, her eyes heavy but peaceful. The world had tried to turn her into the villain, but the truth had spoken for her, quietly, firmly, just like the soil she loved. A week later, just as Zanil was finishing up work in the greenhouse, her phone started buzzing nonstop. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, but something told her to answer. When she picked up, she heard a voice she hadn't expected to hear again so soon. Z. Lorado's voice cracked through the line. They've taken everything. Please just bail me out. There was noise in the background, police chatter, footsteps, the sound of metal doors. Lorado was calling from a police station. Her voice was shaky and full of panic, nothing like the confident, sharp tone she always used. Z, please. I don't know what to do. They froze my accounts, took my car, even my phone. Chaik's gone. I don't have anyone else. Zanil sat still on the wooden bench, her hands trembling slightly as she held the phone. Her chest felt tight. She wanted to say something comforting, but her throat closed up. So many memories came rushing back. The insults, the laughter, the cold words when Lorado mocked her life and her husband. Tendo looked up from across the room, reading the pain on her face without her saying a word. Is it her? He asked softly. Zanil nodded. He walked over and put a steady hand on her shoulder. His voice was calm but heavy. We both know what this costs, not money but peace. Zanil stared at the floor. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of everything unsaid. She had forgiven Lorado many times before, but this was different. This wasn't just about family. It was about self-respect, about all the nights she cried while being mocked for choosing a life built on hard work instead of luxury. She took a deep breath, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't, Lorado. You mocked what built us. Maybe now you'll understand. On the other end, there was a sharp gasp. Z, please. I'm your sister. Zanil closed her eyes. Her heart ached, but her hands didn't shake anymore. She had made her choice. "I'm sorry," she said softly, and then she ended the call. The phone slipped from her hands and landed on the table with a dull thud. For a long moment, neither she nor Tendo said anything. Then he pulled her into a quiet hug, and she finally let herself cry, not out of guilt, but out of relief. That night, as the crickets sang outside, Zanil sat by the window watching the moon rise over their field. Her heart still hurt for her sister, but for the first time in years she felt free. She had planted her peace deep in the soil of honesty and hard work, and she wasn't going to dig it up for anyone. Months went by after Lorado's arrest. The noise around her story faded from the news, replaced by newer scandals. Eventually, she was released on bail, not by Zanil, but by a distant uncle who took pity on her. By then, Chaik had vanished, leaving nothing but debts and broken promises. Lorado's expensive world had collapsed completely. She moved into a small flat on the edge of Nairobi, the kind of place where traffic hummed outside day and night, and the walls were thin enough to hear neighbors arguing. Gone were the designer clothes and fancy dinners. She sold most of her jewelry to pay rent, then started making simple bracelets and earrings to sell online. Her manicured hands, once used to holding champagne glasses, now shaped beads and wires late into the night. Meanwhile, Zanil and Tendo's farm continued to grow. Their name had become known in the region for their honesty and quality produce. Life wasn't perfect, no life ever is, but it was steady, peaceful, and full of purpose. Still, deep down, Zanil never stopped thinking about her sister. Pride had kept her silent for months, but love finally won. One morning, she packed a basket full of fresh vegetables, eggs, and honey, then took the bus to Nairobi. When Lorado opened the door, she froze. Her eyes widened, then quickly filled with tears. She looked smaller somehow, tired, thinner, softer. "Z," she whispered, her voice trembling. Zanil smiled gently and held out the basket. "I brought you a few things from the farm," she said. "You've lost weight. You need to eat." Lorado took the basket slowly, her eyes glistening. For a moment, she didn't say anything. Then she let out a shaky laugh. "I thought your life was small," she said quietly, still avoiding Zanil's gaze. "Turns out, mine was the one built on sand." Zanil reached over and touched her sister's hand. "The soil never lies, sister," she said softly. "You only get what you plant." The words hung in the air for a long time. Lorado finally looked up, meeting Zanil's eyes for the first time in months. There was no anger left, just a tired kind of understanding. They sat together for hours, talking like they hadn't in years. Lorado shared her struggles, how hard it was to start over, how people she once called friends now avoided her. Zanil listened quietly, offering comfort but never pity. When she stood to leave, Lorado hugged her tightly, her voice breaking. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. As Zanil walked back to the bus stop, the afternoon sun touched her face. She felt a strange peace in her heart, not because things were perfect, but because something broken between them had finally begun to heal. Some lessons, she thought, only the soil could teach. And this one had taken time, tears, and love to grow. A year later, life had taken a beautiful turn for Zanil and Tendo. Their farm had grown beyond what they ever dreamed. They now supplied vegetables, eggs, and honey to several schools, restaurants, and hotels. With their savings and a small loan, they decided to take the next step, opening an organic produce store in Nairobi. They named it Tendo Harvests. It was a bright, cozy space filled with fresh vegetables, fruits, jars of honey, and the earthy smell of homegrown goodness. City families loved it from the first week. People came not just for the food but for the story, the farmer couple who turned hard work into a quiet success. On opening day, the store buzzed with excitement. Zanil wore a simple green dress and an apron embroidered with the store's name. Cameras flashed, customers lined up, and Tendo stood proudly beside her. As Zanil greeted guests and thanked supporters, she noticed someone standing in the corner, quiet, almost nervous. It was Lorado. Zanil's heart skipped a beat. Lorado looked different now. No flashy clothes or makeup, just jeans and a white blouse. But there was something softer about her face, something peaceful. She walked up slowly and smiled. "You didn't think I'd miss this, did you?" she said playfully. Zanil laughed and hugged her. "You came." "Of course," Lorado said. "I even brought my jewelry to sell at the counter. They're handmade, organic enough for your store," she added with a grin. They both laughed, and just like that, the old tension melted away. Lorado spent the day helping serve customers, chatting with kids, and arranging vegetables like she'd worked there for years. The customers loved her energy, not knowing the full story between the two sisters. Later that afternoon, a few reporters came to interview Zanil about her journey. They took photos of the two sisters working side by side. Then one of them asked, "Is this your business partner?" Zanil looked at Lorado and smiled. "She's my sister," she said warmly. "The one who taught me why roots matter." There was a moment of silence before everyone around them smiled. Lorado laughed softly, wiping a tear from her eye. "Trust you to make me cry in public," she whispered. By evening, the store had sold out of nearly everything. Customers promised to return, and the media called Tendo Harvests the face of modern farming in Kenya. But for Zeniel, the biggest success wasn't the store. It was seeing her sister standing beside her again, not as a critic, but as family. As they closed the shop together, Lorado turned to her and said, "You were right about the soil, Z. It doesn't lie." Zeniel smiled, locking up the door. "No," she said softly. "It always gives back, once you stop taking it for granted." They walked out into the Nairobi night, arm in arm, two sisters finally grounded by the same truth. The evening sun painted the sky in shades of gold and orange as Zeniel and Tendo sat on their porch, steaming mugs of tea in their hands. The fields stretched out before them, glowing softly in the light, rows of green and gold that told the story of their hard work. The air was calm, the kind of peace only the countryside could give. They sat quietly for a while, watching a few chickens wander near the fence. Then Tendo turned to her and asked gently, "Do you ever regret forgiving her?" Zeniel took a slow sip of her tea, smiling faintly. "No," she said, "but I'll never forget either." They both laughed softly, the kind of laugh that comes from surviving together. For them, forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was freedom. Just then, Zeniel's phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up and saw a new article trending online. The headline made her heart skip. Farmer couple turned humiliation into a million-shilling agribusiness. The story was about them, their journey from being mocked to becoming an inspiration. People in Nairobi and Eldoret were sharing it, praising their resilience and love. Zeniel smiled quietly, showing Tendo the screen. He chuckled and said, "Looks like the soil finally spoke for us." Zeniel set the phone down and looked out at their land, the place that had once been dismissed as a mud hole. The same soil that had seen their tears, their laughter, and their growth now stood as proof of everything they had built. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she whispered softly. They laughed at the soil, but the soil was listening. And in that quiet moment, surrounded by golden light, peace settled over them like a blessing.